Can I start? Okay.
You can start and maybe first of all answer the important question: where did you sleep this night?
Where?
Where did you sleep?
I remember we finished there. So when there was the problem of not being able to stay in the studio, I of course was every day a little bit nervous. No? So when I either knew or he said he's this or that, to be safe, I would stay out and only go back around midnight. That means sometimes, this is summertime, right? I slept a little bit in Washington Square Park on the bench, but then the police came and said, please clear go out, blah, 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 blah. So we all left. Then I walked to the village, East Village, and somehow, I don't know how I met the people, but they were in the same situation. Nobody had a place to sleep. We ended up to sleep on a traffic island in front of Cooper Union, is a famous school, art school. We were sleeping there, and so I forgot how many hours, and then in the morning I had breakfast, and then I had the key to the studio, and I went into the studio. I didn't do this every day, right? So this happened a couple of times, no? What I usually did when I wasn't sure anything, I would call some people. Do you have some space, blah, blah. This is kind of crashing, And there were a couple of friends who I could do it, and there was a few times, maybe 2-3 times, the people I photographed in the studio, they also had some connection to a guy, rich guy, kind of he had a nice apartment, and he liked to have young people with him, but I think it also was a sexual thing, because he always disappeared with a bunch of people in the bedroom, and I was also there, and I just went to I didn't belong to that crowd, right? I just knew them, and I was just sleeping on the couch, that kind of thing, and so I survived that way, and so I never considered renting a room or apartment, because I just needed the money for cameras. Okay. And you have to understand, at that time in New York, it was a much cheaper second-hand market than in Vienna, for example. Therefore, Nikon or Leica, you could go, put down $50 or something like that, and then maybe a couple, 3 times you pay, and then it was yours. So it was manageable, and they were in a good condition, and the shops were fantastic, and the people really knew about camera, and once they knew you, and anyway, they were really, how can I say, decent people. They didn't sell you trash. It was in good condition, that's it, and they were helping you to buy it, so that way I was able to get a little bit of equipment together, and that was the main thing, to have equipment, because that kind of equipment before I didn't have in Vienna. The Exacta I got rid of, it broke down, and I got rid of it in Mexico, and went to a pawn shop. The guy didn't know anything about cameras. It was clean, a few shutters worked, and he gave me good money, and I had money to eat in Mexico. And but the moment I came back to New York, when I got the job, the key thing was buying cameras. So I never considered apartment or anything like that. It just, also one reason was, to some extent, like it was an insecure situation where, like, I did not know sometimes, is this gonna work out? How long am I gonna stay? I almost was ready when I lost the job in the studio, because he had no jobs for me. It wasn't because he got somebody else. He just didn't have enough jobs to afford an assistant. When I lost that job, I was thinking of coming back to Vienna, and I already had Tokyo on my mind, and go to Tokyo, I don't know, Trans-Siberian or whatever. It so happened that I met, towards the end of this time, I met a woman in New York. So we became a couple, And then she also had no job in New York. She was from Chicago, and together we went to Chicago. So that's where the photography in Chicago then started. And I did all kinds of jobs, photography, and I had some factory. I worked in a chocolate factory in the shipping department because friends had friends, and that's the only job available. Being in the shipping department, sending packages around to the United States, chocolate. Key point was to just pay the rent and eat, right? At the same time, I didn't stop photographing. Out of that time, I'm not sure if you know this name. There's a very famous street where there's a Sunday market, open air market, and also music is there, Maxwell Street. That's in South Chicago, Maxwell Street, which is essentially was a very well-known, if you want to say, black neighborhood. And I bought, like new, a pair of shoes for maybe $50 or something like that. No? These shoes appear in the photographs of Chicago, and it was a unique situation. And I didn't have the money to buy films, to be spending for months on end or a year photographing only this one situation. But I put them into the book. This is this book here about Chicago. And at the time when I printed this book, this was 72, 73, and I gave it to a Swiss friend of mine who was a photo educator in Switzerland. He said, "You should make a whole book just with the shoes." I didn't tell him. I said, "Listen, I didn't have money to whatever." What I did now, I'm making a déjà vu kind of thing based on these photographs that I took in Chicago in 1970. This is kind of spring, it's 1970. I'm taking pictures now of same position kind of thing in Vienna, in Paris. Maybe I go to London to do that. And first of all, I was looking for similar shoes, but it's the American shoes, so it's a little bit different, the cut, than the European shoe, and the leather is different. Then I found something where almost the leather fit, but the cut was different. So I found one pair of shoe that had at least the same kind of texture. It's this kind of shoe which they called Norwegian or Norvega. You're familiar with that? The one with the, in front is that kind of seam. It's not a round. On top you have, and then in front you have a seam. You will see it sometimes with some people will wear it when they wear sort of traditional clothes. They also sometimes wear this kind of shoe. It's popular here. The Italians also make it. I haven't seen it in England, and I don't see it in Paris. So it's a kind of and it's based on a shoe or the way the Norwegians made shoes. Anyway, had a beautiful texture, so I bought that one. So I thought, okay, I don't get the same one, but I found an interesting one. And then I bought since that time, I think I bought 4 or 5 pairs of shoes, because I decided, okay, I'm free to photograph this as I want. And I found chose different shoes, also boots and stuff like that. And I keep photographing these different shoes. And when I photographed it, I originally used the right leg crossed over the left leg. And so you have the shoes, and then you have the background. And so this time, when I did it in Chicago, I only took about half a dozen pictures. Now digitally, when I photograph, I go ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta, and I have sequences of people passing by, or a dog comes, or bicycle goes. And so my right leg gets tired, so I switch to the left leg. I figured I'm allowed to improvise. Still basically the same shooting situation, but not only the right leg, also the left leg. That's a book by itself, so maybe not this year, maybe next year I publish something with that. Because it's interesting, the space, what happens in front of it and this kind of thing. So these shoes were stolen. I had a good job in Chicago working with computers, and I found a nice apartment. and I was working the evening shift from 2 in the afternoon till 10 in the night. So I came home about 11-ish or something like that. I just had moved into this apartment. I come home, unlock, open the door, and the chain was in front. And there was light inside. I said, shit, what is this? And I hear some sound, people running away. So I go downstairs to the guy who owned the building. I said, listen, blah, 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 you know, this. So he got me back in. Because the people who stayed there before hadn't returned the key. He didn't change the locks, saving money, right? Thinking maybe they will return the key or they throw it away. So they walked in. Nobody there. They stole the shoes. I didn't have that much anyway. They stole the shoes. And when you came into the living room, which was also the bedroom, it was this kind of bed which was in the wall, and you pulled it out, a double bed. And they had taken that box full of my photographs that I had processed in New York, and just threw it all over the place and stole the box. The Kodak, you know, the yellow Kodak paper box, 8 by 10 inch box. They stole the shoes and the box. Afterwards, I asked people, who steals a pair of shoes and a box? So I was getting a little bit paranoid. What's going on, you know? Because at that time also, sometimes police would do stuff if they wanted to frame you for whatever reason, you know, typewriter or something, somehow to link you with this. I said, what's with this box? Anyway, then luckily, I had my cameras in the kitchen. And the way Chicago homes are, especially with the medium-sized buildings, I mean, the small buildings, but also medium-sized ones, there is a back porch, which is the fire escape also. And that's the door of the kitchen to go out. So I went, they ran out that door, you know. So my next thing was look into the kitchen. They had looked at the cabinets. There must have been smaller guys because there was a refrigerator, and exactly above that was my bag with cameras. But they couldn't reach that. They only reached the other one. Because of the fridge, they couldn't reach it. So they didn't, otherwise the cameras would have been gone. So how can I say, the damage was not big. It just was a freak thing, you know.
But nevertheless, the shoes were away.
But the shoes were gone. I had other shoes. The shoes that I usually at that time was wearing were these paratrooper shoes, you know, from the military surplus thing, because they were very convenient shoes. Most of the year you could wear them, not in the hot season, but, and it was good to walk and it was solid, you know. These days, the only people who wear that, sometimes you have some punk people wear it, some rightists wear it. You don't see this so much among young people, this kind of military boot. But at that time, that was a standard fashion. You know? The pants were military pants, you know, sailors and all. Anyway, that was good clothes, good material, and but so these shoes have a history. So I'm hooking up with this image, you know. I connect with that. Maybe I call it deja vu Chicago or something like that. No? And in Chicago, I always had an apartment, either together with my girlfriend, and then we split up. I continued in the same apartment. Maybe one or two times I stayed with, no, only one time I stayed with friends, but I always had an apartment. And the last apartment was that apartment. Then I lost that job with it was actually a stock broker, and I was doing in the evening issuing the checks, you know. I just got a bunch of the cards, put it in, a few buttons, and and the money came out. I mean, it was checks, right? And it was this crazy thing that it was a nice job, you know, and it was paid well. And the guy who was my immediate boss, who was a few years older than me, who was a programmer also and everything, his mother needed a job for her boss's son. So she goes to her son, don't you have a job for me? Blah, blah. So they created a situation to get rid of me, to get that guy in there. One woman who liked me in the office, she said, Hans, they're talking bad about you. What's going on? Maybe they want to get rid of you. It was cheap stuff. The guy who was the boss of, there were two bosses. The main boss, who was really the stockbroker guy, had his own office. And then there was the boss who took care of the office. And he started talking trash about me. Don't you think, but this kind of stuff. Nothing I could do. You have to understand, like, I did not have papers. If I would have been American, or even as an immigrant, if I would have had papers, I could have gone to Better Business Bureau and say, hey, then they call up and say, what's going on? Then that might have stopped that, and they might not. But anyway. So when this happened, I decided, okay, time to go. So I came back to Vienna, and that was early summer 71. I left May, went to Norway, Oslo, because I had a friend there, and from Austria, childhood friend. He was a computer programmer, and I thought maybe I can get a job in the summer working with computers, with what I could do as an operator, and I would make enough money and continue to Tokyo, because I had Tokyo on my mind. And he couldn't find a job for me. He then went on a holiday. The job he found for me was in a cement factory, making cement. So I sometimes have to joke in Chicago, make the joke in Chicago, I was making chocolate. In Oslo, I made cement.
It's nearly the same thing.
Same, only the one time it's for eating. So I made all kind. I mean, you have all these bags, and you have the recipe, what you have to mix, and depending what the clients are, and you make the cement. And there was one cement that was really interesting for me because I'd never heard about the thing. Cement that is floating in the water. It's a kind of a mixture, and then maybe there's enough air in it or something, so it floats in the water, it doesn't sink. And I'm not sure if it was that cement or another one, but there was one cement that was actually dangerous to work with. I had to cover up and all, because if you get it on the skin, it burns. It's a certain powder mixed with the cement that does that. But I did this only once, and so pictures. I mentioned that story also in the books that are published now digitally, and it's in here also. I was sleeping in the office there on the couch. So it was cheap for them, it was cheap for me. I didn't need an apartment. On the weekend I could go to the apartment of my friends. I don't remember staying there. I always stayed there in the office. But as I'm lying down after work, I'm looking out this square window, and there's the electric power stuff, and I start photographing that. And on and on and on. I did have quite a few photographs of that, and that became a kind of inspiration for working with wires. It was done when I was in Tokyo. I was photographing a lot of wires. In India, I photographed a lot of wires, and in Philippines, I photographed a lot of wires. The difference between wires here or in Oslo and the wire situation in Asia, since Tokyo, or Japan anyway, it's earthquake problem. Philippines is earthquake problem. Also in India, maybe I'm not sure if it's an earthquake problem or if it's more of a money problem. Fact is, it's easier to have wires open. But what happens when you have it in the open, especially when there are slums nearby, people connect and bring power from there into their hut. Or they bring the telephone line in. You have a slum and there's telephone because they get it from over there.
This you also can see in certain quarters of Rome. You can see it too.
So what happens is, especially in where it's narrow, India is not I mean, of course, in the old town is also very cramped and so, but particularly Tokyo or Manila, you have that situation where there's so many wires, and of course there are intersections. So how you have like abstract sculptures in front of you, and I was photographing that over and over again. It's very interesting stuff. And the interesting thing also is the space, no? Having the wires sharp, or having the background sharp, if that's the sky, or if that's a cloud or something. And of course then the wires get thicker, right? And it's interesting, the unsharp edge of the wire. And I had an interesting experience. I was photographing in North Japan, Tsugaru, which is very famous for shamisen, the instrument area. It's North Japan, and it's also famous because normally they're like half a year snow, and that creates a whole different culture and mental status. Because they have so much snow, I don't know how it's now, but at that time still, there was a lot of snow. I was there in spring, and I was photographing these wires, and suddenly it was not, when you have a lot of wires, you sometimes hear humming or some electric static thing. But just visually, because I just was so engulfed in photographing, some music happened in my head. Not a melody, but just some sound happened in my head. And it was very exciting for me that somehow the visual thing was translated in some kind of a musical experience. When I met an optical engineer from Sigma, he was sitting around with a whole bunch of photographers, Japanese photographers, and he spoke English. I told him the story of this, and I said, man, this was so sexy, I'm photographing wires, and suddenly I hear sounds. So he said, what's sexy about wires? Women are sexy, but wires are sexy. I didn't argue that, Okay. He could live with it, I could live with that. But anyway, I had an interesting experience there. So what I was mentioning to you last time, and I thought I'd bring this with you, is this book. This is the book that I mentioned to you,
Continue.
which, this has a very, it's very, I just make a rough opening, You can see the way the black is, And it's a question of not only the exposure, but also the way I processed it, how the black, sort of grows around there. This is the New York shooting in the studio. Oops. Here. That's the one I mentioned to you where this is all 69. That's where I told you this is what was called the Black Woodstock, right, in Harlem, the music festival. And so the interesting story is how this book, and this is the only my very own copy that's why I have it in this plastic thing to protect it. And this was last year. Was it already 21? No, it was last year, I think. That's a year ago anyway. I suddenly received an email from Australia, and they said, I'm usually buying books about Japan, and as I'm going through the bookshop, and I can't tell you if the Australian guy was actually going to Tokyo, if he was doing it by internet. Fact is, he came across this book. It was different from what he usually buys, but he thought this is very unique, so he bought it. And he had questions. So he asked me a couple of times questions. I answered these questions, and he put it on sale. I didn't follow that because I'm not involved in the money part. I'm not getting anything out of that. And I just thought, number one, I thought it's just nice that somebody by internet finds this book. The signature was in there. I made an exhibition in 1977, and I signed that. So I had the films to make this book. I already had done here in maybe it was 72, 73, something like that. And I took these films with me to Japan, and then I printed this book in Japan in connection with the exhibition. And so there, I don't even remember this guy Kobayashi, who that was, but it's signed to Kobayashi, and I make my signature. Through that signature, the Australian identified me, because on the book you don't find my name. I used a kind of an art name or something like that. And what he did, he made a shot of that, he made a shot of the pictures, and he said, are you the Hans Fleischner who made this? I said, yeah, that's me. And he asked me this couple of questions, and that's it, never heard anything about it. And suddenly, on Instagram, on my timeline, this book appears. So it's the book and flowers, red petals, flowers, rose petals, and again, some images to explain this book. The story that I told the Australian guy, the American guys also. And in America, it was in I think it's West Village, not the East Village, it's West Village. And it's a very unique bookshop, not only internet, but bookshop also, where one-of-a-kind book, where there's no series or there's only one left or something like that. Because of course, when they bought this book, they checked, and they couldn't find this anywhere on the internet, because it didn't go on sale as such. And so I wouldn't sell this in order not to, because they gave it as the one copy, right? And it sold for $500 in New York. I saw that, then I told the guys, there are a couple of dates maybe you might change or this or add. And the guy said, thank you very much for the information, we keep it. But we already sold the book. So since they already sold it, somehow again contacted me. And I asked some questions. I told them, yeah, ask me, but they never contacted me again from New York somebody, or from America somebody. So now I went into the internet, zeroed the book title, my name, etc. And I come to another bookshop. Upper East Side, 80th Street, on Madison Avenue. Also a very unique bookshop, like letters of somebody who died, a famous journalist, and this kind of stuff. Very old books. And this book appeared in this bookshop, and they put it on sale for $1,000. So this kind of really it was for me interesting for two reasons. Number one, people appreciate the work, but also this is really our time.